to the clip of Dr. Yasir
This
Qadhi.
is why people like David would need to fix up, bro, honestly. And I just had to
Yes.
say that some people are just clowns, bro. Honestly, literally clowns.
We don't engage with people like that because they are outright liars. I'm not talking about Dr. Yasir Qadhi, by the way. He mentioned, and Brother Imran mentioned the name. So in case people think that the picture came up and I'm talking about him,
that was no time.
Yeah. Dr. Yasir Qadhi, I think he should have been more clear on this issue. He confused a lot of people with some vague statements he made. Either he should not have indulged in this topic in this particular interview. If he chose to indulge, then he should have gone into more details, clarifying the muhkamat. The muhkamat means established matters, what we talked about in this particular live stream. We talked about established matters in this live stream, right? We talked about them. What is established? Why are Christian missionaries going on a victory parade? Let's see what Yasir Qadhi said and what he was talking about.
Okay, 1 second.
The crisis was very simple. Traditional understandings of ahruf al-qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people outside of, by our academics, by their academics outside of the faith tradition.
Pause, please.
Yep, done.
Here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is saying that the traditional narrative about ahruf and their relationship to the qira'at. Ahruf, those 7 modes of the Quran that were read, okay, in the fluid form before the Uthmanic standardization, their reality, those modes and their reality, and how it affects the later reading of the Quran. He's not talking about the physical copies of the Quran. Let me repeat that. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is not talking about the physical copies of the Quran from the 1st century. He's talking about the reading. He's talking about the relationship of the actual reality of those 7 modes of the Quran, how they were read then, and how the Quran was read post-Uthmanic recension, okay, and their relationship. This is what he's talking about, that Western academics are raising questions about it, okay, and they're not getting answers, okay. Just because they're not getting answers does not mean the Quran is not preserved. The Quran is preserved. As we showed you the text, the physical copy from the life of the Prophet and his companions. The Quran is there, the text is there. The debate is about how it is read in those 10 qira'at and how those 10 qira'at relate to the readings of the Quran before the standardization of Uthman. Is that clear? This is exactly what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about. And I wish he could have clarified more. If he had to mention it, if he had to talk about it, he should have gone into more detail to clarify his position. Okay, and I hope he can come out and clarify his position in more detail. Otherwise, he leaves people confused about his position. People will attack him, Muslims and non-Muslims. Non-Muslims will use his vague, ambiguous statements because he's not clearly explaining what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about. I understand what he's talking about. But the masses out there, the Muslims and non-Muslims, do not understand what he's talking about. He needs to come out and he needs to clarify as to what he was talking about, okay? Because missionaries and Islamophobes and Islam haters are using his statements to claim that the Quran is not preserved. Look, a scholar of Islam is saying this. Look, this scholar has written a book on the Quran and he's confused about the Quran. He's not confused. He stated clearly that the Quran, as in the physical copies, is exactly what we read today from the 1st century, right? He's talking about the qira'at, the pronunciation, the reading, the oral delivery of the Quran, how it relates to the pre-Uthmanic reality of the text.
Right.
This is what he's talking about. This is a very academic question which academics are discussing. He's talking about that. Okay. And he doesn't need to indulge in this. I would advise Dr. Yasir Qadhi to stop indulging in this because this is not his field. He's not an authority to say. I mean, when he wrote his book, Introduction to the Quranic Sciences, he was a graduate student from Medina University. Okay, he was in his early 20s. He was a student. Okay, I don't know what his exact qualification in the Quran is. What he needs to do, he needs to delegate this task to the Ahlul Quran. He needs to he needs to delegate the task to the Ahlul Quran, to the Qur'an, to the masters of the Quran, people who have done PhDs in the Qira'at and they have mastered the transmission of the Quran. He needs to delegate to them, right? Instead of taking it upon himself, talking about the Qira'at and Ahruf and how they correlate and how they relate to each other. Okay, this is my opinion. This is my advice to him as a brother. Okay, I would advise him to avoid making statements that are vague. If you have to make statements, then do lengthy programs like the one we did today and explain your position so people are not left in doubt, because there are people out there, they make all sorts of things, okay, from statements. So it was very unwise, I would say, of Brother Muhammad Hijab and Dr. Qadhi to discuss this in such a brief way and move on. Okay, they should not, leave people confused. They must make things clear. Let's go back to the.
So let me ask you now.
Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to
pause that. When Dr. Qadhi says that Muslims are pressed a little bit and then they sami'na wa ata'na, I think he made a mistake there. Okay, respectfully, he made a mistake there. Okay, Muslims just don't say sami'na wa ata'na. Muslims have studied our Quran. Our scholars have written books on Qira'at. Detailed books on Qira'at. Okay, they have studied this. Imam Al-Jazri, I gave you an example, Imam Al-Jazri. Okay, go and look at his works and see what he has to say on the Qira'at and other scholars. Okay, so it's not just we receive something and we submit to it blindly. No, scholars study. They write lengthy works. They are all available in Arabic. And Orientalists and Western scholars, they are still studying those sciences. And to say the least, I would like to mention this. A lot of these Orientalists actually haven't studied in a lot of depth. Okay, they keep coming up with these new theories. The epistemology of Western scholars, the epistemological lens they use to study Islamic sources is different to the lens we use to study Islamic sources. Our epistemology and the epistemology of Western scholars is not the same. Our epistemology doesn't have to be the same as the epistemology of Western scholars. Epistemology is basically theory of knowledge. How you get to know things. How you get to know things, in case people don't know what epistemology is, right? So,
the emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. Then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you every single...
Dr. Qadhi, if you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about this. If you talk about these things, Dr. Qadhi keeps saying that I don't want to be explicit. I don't want to be explicit. If you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about these matters, because you're confusing people out there. People don't know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Okay, but people don't know. The awam, the masses, don't know what you're talking about. So my request from Dr. Yasir Qadhi is that he needs to come out and needs to clarify more in detail as to what he was talking about exactly, for the people to understand, right? And we have done this 2 hours video explaining what we are talking about, and we have done our best to be as clear, as crystal clear as possible about the preservation of the Quran. That's how you need to come out and explain. Okay, there's no point of saying that there are reports there are reports. We know exactly what's there. We know exactly what's there, and we know how our scholars have explained all these reports. Okay, just because Western scholars cannot get their heads around these reports, and just because they cannot accept certain reports, okay, Western scholars, they work in a very funny way. What we deem authentic, they will say, no, it doesn't seem authentic. They will leave it. And then they will apply their own self-concocted criteria on Islamic sources, and they will bring something inauthentic from Islamic sources, and they will say, this seems to be authentic, and we will go by that. This is how Western academics work. They don't go by our epistemology. They don't follow our boundaries, our limits. of authenticity and inauthenticity of hadith or reports. They concoct their own ideas, their own standards, and they go by their own standards. Now, just because they do that, do we have to agree with them? No. We tell them we don't accept your standards, especially when they clash directly with our solid epistemology, Islamic epistemology. It's Islamic theory of the preservation of the Quran and the hadith. And now, thankfully, as we have read the quotes, a lot of them are coming out and they're confirming the veracity of the Quran and the veracity of the hadith literature. So Yasir Qadhi, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, respectfully, he is, I think, you know, he needs to come out and clarify more as to what he was talking about when he talks about Western scholarship.
Okay. So Adnan, just to make you aware, we're closing in on we're over 2 hours now. So inshallah,
yeah, we're gonna finish. We're gonna finish very soon.
That's fine. Inshallah. I just wanted to point just to remind you, inshallah. But take your time.
Yeah.
Very advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. These are now within the Western.
Here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about Western academics saying that the standard narrative, okay, on the relationship between ahruf and the qira'at has holes in it. Okay. He's talking about Western scholarship. He's not talking about Muslim scholars. We have enough information to understand and to know what the Quran is. We have enough information on the qira'at and their transmission. We have enough information to know that ahruf were variations before the standardization of Uthman. Ahruf, they were variant readings of the Quran. There were different modes of the reading of the Quran before the Uthmanic standardization. Okay, and then Uthman standardized the text into the Qurayshi dialect for the future generations to read it. Okay, we have enough information to know that. So what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about, as I understand him, I hope I understand him correctly, that he's saying, Western scholars are saying, there are holes in the standard Islamic narrative about, you know, the relationship between ahruf and the qira'at. Okay, but guess what? Is this new? We have ulama, Islamic scholars, who have over 30 opinions about the nature of ahruf. The Muslim scholars are telling you that there is so much difference of opinion about the exact nature of the ahruf. Why do we need Western scholars to tell us this? And why do we need to be even worried about that?
Yeah.
Why do we, just because Western scholars are saying that we do not have enough information about the ahruf, okay, so what? Do we have the physical copies of the Quran from Uthman's time, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ? The answer is yes. We have the exact physical copies of the Quran from the life of the Prophet, from the life of Uthman, from the life of the other companions of the Prophet. We have physical copies we can look at, we can read, we can do a comparison between this copy and those copies, and it's exactly the same. So how does it have any bearing on the text of the Quran? What he's talking about is the nature of ahruf. What ahruf were actually like. Okay, just because ahruf were not preserved, okay, or ahruf were basically the text of the Quran was brought down to the Qurayshi dialect. Okay, the nature of the pre-Uthmanic text, you know, scholars have many opinions about it, as I stated early. Some say it were spellings, some say it was about the order of the you know, the words in verses, not the order of verses, the words within a particular verse, the order of words in a particular verse. For example, the variations are about plural and singular. The variations are about feminine and masculine wording. Okay, so these are slight variations to make the text convenient for the Arab tribes and their dialects. Okay, they were there. Okay, the exact nature of these variations, scholars differ. Scholars of Islam differ. So if the Western scholars are calling them holes in our narrative, let them call it holes. Just because there were variations, God revealed variations. Let me clarify. Let me state this very, very clearly, categorically. We will, inshallah, use this video once and for all to deal with these matters. God revealed variations in the pre-Uthmanic text. Allah revealed the variations. Allah revealed the ahruf. Allah revealed 7 different modes and styles of reading the Quran to accommodate the different styles of the Arabs, the different styles of speaking, the different speech in the Arabic language of the Arabs. To accommodate that, Allah revealed 7 different modes to the Prophet. Okay, those variations have no bearing whatsoever on the text of the Quran. I repeat,
that's a key.
Those variations have no bearing whatsoever on the text of the Quran. Okay, because what is the text of the Quran? Coming from the Prophet and his companions. What is it? Go ahead, please.
Academy, that they're bringing forth issues. Their level of now knowledge is leaps and bounds above what it used to be, 100 years ago. What is happening in the last few years is not me anymore. It's the Western academics. These problems are now becoming mainstream. And by and large, our ulama in the Eastern world are not aware, by and large, of what's going on in the Western side of things. And they're not...
Okay, pause there, please. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is simply, I'm not going to say he's confused, he's a learned man. And I wish he was challenged on this by Muhammad Hijab. Okay, when he says our scholarship is unaware, I don't know what he's talking about. Wallahi, there are chunky volumes written on Qira'at. And Western scholars are miskeens. They are relying upon information that comes from our scholars. Where are Western scholars getting information from? Are they digging? Do they have these Indiana Jones hats on? And they go to the Middle East and they start digging in the mountains and the caves and they're finding new texts and new books and they're basing their theories on those. Oh, all what is coming from Western scholars is based upon entirely from our scholars, from the Arabic works written by our scholars in the classical period and in the modern period. I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about, that our scholars are not aware of these problems. They are aware of every single problem, if you want to call it a problem. Okay, the questions Western or Orientalists are raising about the exact nature of, for example, the ahruf, okay, are not new questions. They are known to the scholars of Islam. They are the ones who transmitted these questions and these opinions, right? As I said, they have no bearing on the text of the Quran, the physical text, the morphology, the consonantal ductus, the consonantal skeleton of the words of the Quran, as we saw on the screen. Okay, let's go. Let's go.
That was the end of the video.